I'm John Rodgers from Cuyahoga Falls, and we're going to be doing the Men of Rushmore, and this is number 4, Theodore Roosevelt. He had the right stuff. His path went through narrow trails in the depths of badlands, with thorns tearing at him, but he emerged into upland meadows ablaze with wildflowers. He struggled through savage weather conditions of rain and wind and blizzard, but he emerged under blue skies with puffy white clouds and gentle breezes. He thrust his face and spirit into that of his enemy, even on the battlefield, and came away the winner. He negotiated with heads of nations on problems of critical importance, but he always found time to play with children. He is Theodore Roosevelt, the most recent president of the Men of Rushmore. The years of his presidency are known as the golden age of conservation. This was a period of honing the tools that would create the National Park Service and setting aside land that would be our national parks and monuments. And in this time, he vastly expanded the size and influence of the Forestry Service. He tamed the trusts, settled strikes and other disputes, and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He championed conservation, but was a big game hunter. He admired the vibrant colors of a bird, but then shot it for a specimen. He loved the relationship of his family, but went away from them on many dangerous endeavors. He loved life, but was never afraid to die. Theodore Roosevelt was born on October 27, 1858, in a home on 20th Street in Lower Manhattan, New York City. And this is what Manhattan, that's the house, and this is what the inside of the house looks like. And then this is what Manhattan looked like in those days. Indeed, his growing up years were spent in Manhattan, except for excursions to the country, many times for health reasons, and trips abroad to Europe and Egypt. And Theodore would not recognize New York today. And here's part of his diary. At this time, he was known as T.D. Strange happenings tie history together, and one of these is illustrated by young Theodore watching the funeral procession of Abraham Lincoln as it passed his grandfather's house at Union Square. He is one of the children in that room. He was sickly with a weak body and had extremely poor vision. This is what he looked like at 5 years old. His father provided a gym and urged T.D., as his family called him during his childhood, to build his own body. The task took years, but was accomplished. He's now 10. Incidentally, when he got older, he was called Theodore, a T.R. He always disliked the name Teddy. So that task took quite a while, but he became a competent wrestler and a boxer. It was only after his father gave him a rifle that his poor eyesight came to light. He was letting other boys use the rifle, and they were hitting a target that he couldn't even see. His father quickly had him tested, and he wore glasses the rest of his life. Later, while boxing, he lost sight in one eye. And would you believe he was president of the United States while he was boxing and lost the sight in that one eye? His father had a deep and lasting, very beneficial effect on Theodore. He's getting ready. He's going to Harvard. He graduated from Harvard in 1880 after an active 4 years. In that same year, he married Alice Lee. This says, I only took pictures of the buildings that would have been the same as when he was there. He would have seen that building just like it is. And this is Alice Lee. Now, while at Harvard, he had started a book called The Naval History of the War of 1812. And it was published in 1881. 1881 also marked his first elected office for the first of 3 terms as a New York State Assemblyman. And this is the State House at Albany. and this is TR as an assemblyman. He continued his education by studying law at Columbia University. It was in 1883, while serving in the New York Assembly, that he went west on vacation to shoot buffalo in the Dakota Territory. Buffalo were hard to find by then, and TR and his cowboy guide for a week rode, slept, and did everything in rain and other assorted bad weather. Theodore astonished his cowboy guide by his much repeated remark, "By Godfrey, but this is fun." You got to picture the rain coming down over his face when you hear that comment. The next year, Sagamore Hill, a Queen Anne-style home at Oyster Bay on Long Island, was built, and for the first time, Theodore was a delegate to the National Republican Convention. But 1884 was a year of tragedy, for on the same day, his wife of only a few years and his mother died in the same house in New York. Alice, his baby daughter, here with his sister Bammy, was only a few days old. Theodore headed for the Dakota Territory. Today we look upon Theodore Roosevelt's Dakota days as a curiosity, but we are indebted to that time and place for the way they built the man. After such a devastating loss, it was the demands, hardship, friendships, and stark grandeur of the Dakota Territory that saved him. It was on one of these tough roundups that he caught his cowboy friends off guard with, "Hasten forward quickly there." And I can picture the cowboys just falling off their horses laughing at that comment. And more of his words. It was still the Wild West in those days, the Far West, the West of Owen Wister's stories and Frederick Remington's drawings, the West of the Indian and the buffalo hunter, the soldier and the cowpuncher. In that land we led a free and hardy life, with horse and with rifle. Ours was the glory of work and the joy of living. Theodore Roosevelt could have excelled at many careers. He was a first-class naturalist and published several animal life histories that are still good today. Specimens collected by him are still in the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And incidentally, it was his father that helped and was really instrumental in starting that very museum. He was still collecting specimens for the Smithsonian on his trip to Africa after ending his time as president. He was an accomplished writer and did earn money from his books during his lifetime. As president, he wrote a book called The Deer Family. That's D-E-E-R. Can you imagine any of our more recent presidents writing any book on those subjects? He was an authority on naval matters. Except for the problem of waiting for orders, he would have excelled in the military. But he chose politics and pursued his profession like a man possessed. He got his basic grounding in his precinct, the picture you're looking at, in New York City. Thus, unlike many on the national scene, he knew how things worked at the lowest levels. In 1886, he married Edith Carew and began a long and happy marriage. He ran unsuccessfully for mayor of New York City. The home at Sagamore Hill began to come alive, and TR continued his writing. About family life, he had this to say: "For unflagging interest and enjoyment, a household of children, if things go reasonably well," he put a lot of ifs in this, "certainly makes all other forms of success and achievement lose their importance by comparison." And then followed several years when he stayed in the same position, U.S. Civil Service Commissioner. And these were some of his words: "When my duty is to enforce the law, that law is surely going to be enforced. I'm perfectly willing to be turned out or legislated out, but while in, I mean business." During these 5 to 6 years, several more books were published. These included biographies, history, and The Wilderness Hunter. As president of the Police Commission of New York City, He walked the streets of New York at any hour of the day or night. Quite often, Jacob Riis, a newspaper reporter and a reformer, was with him. It was Jacob Riis, through a book, followed by personal contact, who opened the whole tenement, poverty, oppressed picture to Mr. Roosevelt. During this time, the police became a smooth working outfit. Any sign of corruption at any level was weeded out. You just never knew when Mr. Roosevelt would be standing alongside of you, and it might be at 3 o'clock in the morning. A particularly fine TR saying came out of those days. Be practical as well as generous in your ideals. Keep your eyes on the stars, but remember to keep your feet on the ground. And somewhere in that picture, it's said to be the police department on Mulberry Street. I never have been able to find it. And while we're talking about sayings, one of his favorites was a West African proverb, and you will recognize this: speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far. And one of my favorites is, I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of the strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, of labor and strife. To preach that highest form of success which comes not to the man who desires mere easy peace, but to the man who does not shrink from danger, from hardship, or from bitter toil, and who out of these wins the splendid ultimate triumph. In 1897 and 98, he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and it was he, while acting Secretary, who commanded Dewey to get and keep the fleet ready and together at Hong Kong. Thus he had set the stage for the victory over the Spanish fleet at Manila Bay, and this is the sinking of the Maine. Later, in 1898, there was a short period in Theodore Roosevelt's life which is remembered more than even his deeds as president. His role in the Rough Riders and the storming of San Juan Hill in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. About the Rough Riders, Theodore Roosevelt had this to say: all Easterners and Westerners, Northern and Southerners, officers and men, cowboys and college graduates, wherever they came from and whatever their social positions, possessed in common the trait of hardihood and a thirst for adventure. Incidentally, TR was about the only one on a horse during the famous charge. And I moved a little quickly to the capital at Albany, because in that same year, after the farewell to the Rough Riders, Theodore was elected governor of New York, and once more went to Albany. His usual demands were for honesty and integrity in government, and listen to these words. His words: every official of the government, and he didn't say which one, all of them, every official of the government must be as clean as a hound's tooth. Couldn't say it any better. Couldn't hope for it any more, I guess. Several quotes will illustrate his attitudes and growth during a period of about 15 years, starting with 1896. All the laws that the wit of man can devise will never make a man a worthy citizen unless he has within him the right stuff, unless he has self-reliance, energy, courage, the power of insisting on his own rights, and the sympathy that makes him regardful of the rights of others. The first requisite of a good citizen in this republic of ours is that he shall be able and willing to pull his own weight, that he shall not be a mere passenger. Words are of no account if not accompanied by deeds. Peace, like freedom, is not a gift that tarries long in the hands of cowards or those too feeble or short-sighted to deserve it. I do not give the snap of my fingers for a very good man who possesses the peculiar kind of goodness that benefits only himself in his home. He had his ranches along this river in North Dakota. This is the Little Missouri. And this statue of him is on an island in the Potomac, and the whole island is named for him right outside of D.C., right at D.C., I should say. Still quoting Mr. Roosevelt, "I have known a good many miserable people in my life, and infinitely the most miserable among them have been those who have deliberately and with set purposes devoted their lives to the pursuit of what they call pleasure. I have scant sympathy with the plea of insanity advanced to save a man from the consequences of crime, when, unless that crime had been committed, it would have been impossible to persuade any responsible authority to commit him to an asylum as insane." That one we're hearing about today, but it's going the other way. The party leadership wanted very much to get rid of Theodore Roosevelt, the still honest upstart. And in 1900, they worked out a nomination of him as Vice President of the United States. Now I want to stop on this picture for a moment. He is Vice President, he's campaigning. It's July the 5th, 1900. But he's at Knox College, Illinois. And Knox College, Illinois was the site of the fifth and most famous of the Lincoln-Douglas debates back in the other century. So William McKinley was the presidential candidate. Theodore was the vice president. The ticket won, and TR said, "If I have been put on the shelf, my enemies will find that I can make it a cheerful place of abode." When McKinley was shot, and this picture was taken only about 20 minutes before he was shot, Theodore rushed to Buffalo, New York. Recovery seemed swift and sure, and TR then left for the Adirondacks Mountains. He had been on vacation. Conditions changed, and Mr. Roosevelt rushed again to Buffalo, arriving only in time to be sworn in as the 26th President of the United States in the Wilcox residence that you're looking at in Buffalo. Senator Mark Hanna of Ohio remarked, "Now look, that damn cowboy is President of the United States." And in 1901, Theodore Roosevelt did move into the position that he would later call a bully pulpit. As president, Theodore Roosevelt had quite a few things to say. "We are face to face with our destiny, and we must meet it with a high and resolute courage. Much has been given us, and much will rightfully be expected from us. We have become a great nation, forced by the facts of its greatness into relations with the other nations of the earth, and we must behave as beseems a people with such responsibilities." This picture was taken in 1902 in Bangor, Maine, and 3 days later, Mr. Roosevelt was meeting with Winston Churchill in Vermont. I talked before about history tying itself together. Still Mr. Roosevelt, "No man can be a good citizen unless he has a wage more than sufficient to cover the bare cost of living and hours of labor short enough to bear his share in the management of the community." While TR was Civil Service Commissioner, the Sherman Antitrust Act had been passed. Except for one dismissed case, it had been dormant. And when J.P. Morgan and Associates merged the railroads of the Northwest, they expected no ripple of trouble. But Mr. Roosevelt burst suddenly on the scene, and a program of trust busting was unleashed. Morgan's offer to compromise was met with, "There can be no compromise in the enforcement of the law." He further stated, "We are today suffering from the tyranny of minorities. It is a small minority that is grabbing our coal deposits, our water power that lies behind our monopolies and trust." The big stick in the settlement of the long 1902 coal strike was the threat of 10,000 Army regulars taking over the mines. Finally, Eli Root, Secretary of War, and J.P. Morgan brought pressure on the mine operators, and they finally agreed to arbitration, which had to be beneficial to the miners since conditions were so bad in the mines. And TR's words were, This country will not be a permanently good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a reasonably good place for all of us to live in. Now, a story about Theodore Roosevelt should contain the name of this man, Henry Cabot Lodge. He was a senator because he provided strong backing and good advice to TR over a long period of time. Now, I have a section here that I at one time had left out, so I don't have pictures for it, so we will leave Mr. Lodge on there. Russia and British Columbia had established a proper boundary between what had become our Alaska and British Columbia. When gold was discovered in the Klondike, Canada wanted to redefine the line, giving them full access to the gold fields. The previous administration had been accommodating, but Mr. Roosevelt was not happy with the situation, especially since it was possible that gold would be discovered in the disputed area. He warned that he would not hesitate to use troops on the boundary line. The case finally went to an uneasy arbitration with the English Lord Chief Justice voting with the Americans. The settlement came on October 1903. During his years in the bully pulpit, Mr. Roosevelt reflected on many things. And he was constantly talking about what would make the United States great. Go back to your homes and your daily lives with a resolute purpose to war for honesty in its deepest and broadest significance, both in our business and in our politics. Americanism is a question of spirit, conviction, and purpose, not of creeds or birthplace. The things that will destroy America are prosperity at any price, peace at any price, safety first instead of duty first, the love of soft living, and the get-rich-quick theory of life. We've got to watch out for those who offer to be crooked on our behalf. We have to condemn misdoing, whosoever's alley it's in, and recognize that in the end, national integrity comes down to you and me, the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule. This was Fifth Avenue in 1905. Now, I don't have that one, but this is 42nd Street today. And here is TR in the White House. You've probably seen that picture before. Back to his quotes. I am not trying to be subtle or original. I am trying to make the everyday citizen here in America stand for the things which I regard as essential to good government. When re-election, or rather his real election, loomed, TR wondered about his chances. He had pulled in the reins on corporations and their rich leaders. He had faced up to the labor unions and their use of violence. But most telling of all, he had pulled away from the desires and pleasures of the party politicians. But the win was easy, the greatest presidential landslide up through that time. Then he had this to say: we here in America hold in our hands the hopes of the world. The fate of the coming years and shame and disgrace will be ours if in our eyes the light of high resolve is dimmed, if we trail in the dust the golden hopes of men. In 1905, Theodore Roosevelt's personal messages led Russia and Japan to the bargaining table at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to seek an end to their war. When the talk stalemated, it was his suggested terms of concession that carried the day. 5 years later, he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize when he was in Norway. In typical fashion, he kept the medal and gave away the money. And this is a little park in Oslo. The Peace Prize is awarded in Oslo. All the rest of the Nobel Prizes are awarded in Stockholm. I took the isthmus, started the canal, and then left Congress, not to debate the canal, but to debate me. But while the debate goes on, the canal does too. And they are welcome to debate me as long as they wish, provided that we can go on with the canal. Those are TR's own words, and whether you consider him right or wrong, he and at least 2 men that he appointed, Goethals on construction and Gorgas on mosquitoes and yellow fever control, were responsible for the Panama Canal. And the linking of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans at such a point helped make the United States a world power. This man, Gifford Pinchot, was considered by Roosevelt the man to whom the nation owes most of what has been accomplished as regards the preservation of the natural resources of our country. Personally, I would give a lot of the credit to this man, George Bird Grinnell. That's where Mr. Pinchot got much of his information, and he owed him a lot also. He also gave considerable credit to F.H. Newell, director of the Reclamation Service. These 2 men, Pinchot and Newell, were strong in pushing the use of the forests and irrigation. And being a Sierra Clubber, here's what I have to say. Reclamation means what it says, only if you consider that nature didn't do a good job. Much of reclamation is simply dam building in order that water might be available for irrigation. And often, in more recent times especially, the building of a dam has not really been justified. I hope you're looking at these little cartoons and noticing the teddy bear in them as we go by. Because around this time, Clifford Berryman tied Theodore and the teddy bear together for all times with his cartoons. The 2 men met later and were quite friendly, although T.R. never liked the teddy bear connection or the name Teddy. But Theodore Roosevelt gave much credit to people like John Muir, with whom he spent a memorable time in Yosemite National Park. That's Yosemite Falls in the background off beyond Theodore. He slept under the big trees, and on another morning they awakened under 4 inches of snow, which T.R. thought was bully. It was John Muir, another naturalist, who actually had the influence that resulted in much of the preservation of parklands and refuges by Mr. Roosevelt, and thus the name of the golden age of conservation. Theodore Roosevelt's words, "In the Grand Canyon, Arizona has a natural wonder which, so far as I know, is in kind absolutely unparalleled. And I want to ask you to do one thing in connection with it. In your own interest and in the interest of the country, leave it as it is. You cannot improve on it. The ages have been at work on it, and man can only mar it. I recognize the right and duty of this generation to develop and use the natural resources of our land, but I do not recognize the right to waste them or to rob by wasteful use the generations that come after us." And I have in parentheses, we seem to be acting directly against these words. In 1906, the Antiquities Act, that's sometimes called the National Monument Act, was passed, and with it and executive power, T.R. established 18 national monuments, 51 bird refuges, and 4 big game refuges. This is Crater Lake. He pushed through Congress 5 national parks, including that Mesa Verde, that Crater Lake, and he enlarged the boundaries of Yosemite, which was already a national park. Yellowstone was already a national park also, long before there was such a thing as a Park Service. And I want to call your attention to this one. This is Chaco Canyon in western New Mexico. You have to drive about 30 miles of dirt road to get back into it. But the piece you're looking at is Pueblo Bonito, and this was one of the very first places that Theodore Roosevelt saved. It's a historic park over in New Mexico. That's Chaco Canyon, Pueblo Bonito, and that's another one of the ruins in that same canyon. And even that long ago, he had a word to say about endangered species. When I hear of the destruction of a species, I feel just as if all the works of some great writer had perished. Between the years of 1901 and 1909, 230 million acres were put into the national forests, wildlife refuges, and other lands such as national parks and monuments. The national monuments that TR established include Mount Olympus, Grand Canyon, Chaco Canyon, Muir Woods, and Petrified Forests. Theodore Roosevelt had a direct hand in the reintroduction of buffalo into Yellowstone National Park, and those are some that you're looking at there, and into the Wichita Mountains in Oklahoma. In the Wichitas, TR had a message from this man, a Comanche chief, Quanah Parker, and Parker said, "Tell the president that the buffalo is my old friend, and it would make my heart glad to see a herd once more roaming about Mount Scott." And that's Mount Scott in the background in the Little Wichitas by Lawton, Oklahoma. And these are direct descendants from the ones that Theodore personally arranged to have shipped to Oklahoma. Nature was a lifelong love of Theodore.